When you walk in Dubai, what is the place you miss the most? We have water, we have trees, but we don't really have mountains. That sense of green nature is something I often miss in Dubai. And there is another thing I feel every day, the lack of shaded spaces. Walking here can be beautiful, but it can also be uncomfortable. Sometimes, even when there are no cars, you still don't feel fully safe. Scooters pass quickly, people ride through pedestrian areas, and at any moment someone walking can feel exposed or at risk. In some ways, it is not so different from walking beside cars. You are still alert, you are still protecting yourself. So whenever I design in Dubai, my starting point is always the same. How can this place become better for people? That is where this project began. Not from the idea of making an iconic tower, but from the question of how architecture can bring more comfort, more shade, more nature, and a better walking experience into the city. This project started with an invitation from Emaar to design an iconic tower in Dubai Creek Harbour. And here I want to share the design process behind it. It's essentially a showcase of what design beyond form really means. It's how a context-driven process can guide form as a natural outcome. As I often say, design is more about offering solutions to problems, so I always start by identifying what those problems are. As it was an invited competition and the design brief was actually quite simple, the requirements were quite standard: a building height of G+55, sufficient parking based on local codes, 2 residential towers, standard setbacks, and a maximum gross floor area of around 90,000 square meters. These were straightforward requirements. The rest was open to interpretation. Now let's move into the specifics. The site is located in Dubai Creek Harbour. Looking west, you can see the Burj Khalifa in the distance, still visually connected to the site. There's also a mix of sea and downtown skyline. To the east, there's an established residential area with a combination of high-rise, mid-rise, and low-rise buildings. But understanding this context alone doesn't tell us enough about what problems need to be solved. So as I always do, I visited the site. Fortunately, I live nearby, so I went several times to observe and understand the atmosphere. When I first arrived, I explored the area as any visitor would do, by driving through, walking around, and trying to experience it naturally. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the first thing I felt was very familiar. We have waterfronts, towers, and landscapes, but many places are still not easy to walk, not because there is no space, but because the walking experience is not comfortable enough. The streets exist, but they don't feel like places you want to walk through. There is a lack of active edges: retail, cafes, restaurants, the kind of everyday activity that brings life to the street. And without that, you don't really feel the presence of people. On top of that, shade is missing. And that lack of protection creates a clear disconnection between people and the street. Also, green spaces do exist, but they often feel limited in this climate, so they're not something people can fully engage with. Even when there is a central garden, it is usually open to the sky. So yes, it can be beautiful, especially at night. But during the day, in this climate, people need protection. And when I look toward the promenade, I ask myself, do we really have that kind of experience here? A green, shaded, and comfortable journey that naturally brings people from the street toward the waterfront? That became the starting point. I didn't want to simply design another tower. I wanted to bring that missing green experience into the new development. So the question became, how can this project offer shade, greenery, movement, and a stronger sense of destination? With these questions in mind, the design process began. The site is approximately 31,460 square meters, with a height limit of 55 stories and a maximum GFA of 90,000 square meters. And parking was required, ideally limited to 1 basement level due to construction constraints. However, additional above-ground parking was also necessary to accommodate residents and visitors. The next step was spacing. How far apart should the towers be to ensure privacy? Research suggests that around 50 meters is the distance where people no longer recognize facial details, allowing residents to feel comfortable. So I applied this logic to define the tower placement. Then I considered the function: lower levels more public, upper levels more private. But this created another issue: view blockage. One tower could block the view toward the skyline. So I adjusted the positioning to open up visual connections. At the ground level, I opened the space to create a fully public environment. The goal was not just to fill the site, but to create a place people could walk through, stay in, and naturally understand. The answer came from movement. Instead of rigid geometry, I introduced curves. Curves create smoother, more intuitive circulation and a stronger sense of spatial comfort. From this logic, the form began to emerge. The design developed as a layered system, buildable, accessible, and continuous. The tower cores were integrated within this geometry based on standard residential layouts. Then came the canopy, a continuous shaded structure connecting the lower levels and creating comfortable public space. This canopy became more than protection from the sun. It became the identity of the project, a green-shaded journey that links the development together. On top of this base, the towers were reintroduced, following the same geometric logic. The result was a composition where towers and podium work together as one system. At the ground level, the space becomes a lively environment with retail, cafes, community functions, and shaded green areas. A place where people can gather, walk, rest, and move naturally toward the promenade. Finally, the facade. Instead of defining a fixed design, I introduced a simple idea. What if residents could choose balcony or no balcony? This allows variation and creates a facade shaped by its users. And that is the core of this project. Not a form-driven design, but a context-driven outcome. That is how Hilly Evergreen was developed.